Thank you so much, Nicola, and thank you so much to EMCC for bringing me back again. It is an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you. Thank you for participating and showing up. I'm so excited and looking forward to the conversation and dialogue we're going to have around contracting for team coaching. So nice to see so many familiar faces as well. So thank you. I'm going to put it up on the shared screen just so that we can take a look at some of the content that we're going to be covering, and also make sure that we have opportunities for great dialogue as well. And just so you know, I've got two screens here, so I will be looking to the side just so that I can also see you. And I appreciate folks staying on video. It is so nice to connect with people and see people smile and be able to read the room. So just to let you know what we really want to talk about, and I also want to find out from you, what are some of those challenges you have around team coaching? We're also going to share some tips and strategies to help you improve the team contracting process, and more importantly, improve those relationships that you need to have for effective team coaching with the sponsor, with the team leader, and the team itself, and of course, other stakeholders. Just at a very basic level, a contract or an agreement is really about that decision made between the coach and the team and other stakeholders concerning their work together and how they are going to work to achieve their goals. So let's just find out. Put it to the chat for me very quickly. I'm curious, does contracting only happen at the start of the team coaching process? True or false? Let's see what the responses are in the chat. True or false? I always love it. I usually see some people wait to see what the trend is, and then they put their response in. So you're absolutely right. It is false. And we know that this is a very challenging process. In fact, we have to recontract continually. Anyone here ever had scope creep as they're working with a team? Raise your hands. Absolutely, right? And that's because either we didn't contract well enough to begin with, or we need to recontract because something new has emerged or developed. So let's find out in the chat room, what challenges do you face when contracting during team coaching? By the way, we had over 300 people sign up for this session, and we've got 100 or so on live. So I just want to let you know we're going to give a few minutes just to see so we can get all the responses in and take a look at the trends. So kindly key into the chat room, please. What challenges, and I'll put in the title, what challenges do you face when contracting for team coaching? Let's hear what you guys are dealing with. I'll give another minute of silence, and then we'll go through and take a look at some of the key themes. And while you're doing that too, I always get asked the question, will you share the PowerPoints? Absolutely, I will share them with you at the end of our session. And I also encourage you to save the chat because there'll be lots of great ideas shared here. So let's take a look at some of those team coaching and team contracting challenges. Dealing with disagreements and non-respectful conversations. People don't know what team coaching is. What? They don't know by now? Come on, we've been doing this for a while. And I live in Canada. It's still really new here. They really don't know what it is. I have yet to see it pop up in very many RFPs or conversations with senior leaders. The client doesn't want to rescope. Yeah, they either don't want to, expand the budget or the timelines, for sure. Interference from non-team members. Oh, Michael, you've got my curiosity peaked, probably from some other stakeholders or other client groups impacted. It feels tokenistic. Intact team loses members. Oh, this is happening more and more, isn't it? How many of you are coaching teams where the membership is changing probably at a higher rate than what it did pre-COVID, for example? And this is really challenging too, because then how do we do our pre and post team metrics to see where the improvement is if there's been too much significant change? Pricing, never a challenge, always a challenge. And we'll share some tips around that too, but pricing definitely depends where you're located globally, the types of clients you're working with, the industries, etc. Navigating leader and team needs, managing boundaries. Oh, sponsor doesn't want to go deep enough. Isn't that frustrating for you as a team coach when you're really curious and you want to enable the team to go further and enable the team to make positive change, but the sponsor isn't there with you? Yeah, absolutely. What to do when one or more members aren't on board? Thank you, Patricia. Coming in from Clark, depending on when you are involved, understanding at what point the team is actually at. Ah, interesting. So maybe you weren't involved even in the initial contracting, perhaps, and you're stepping in to support the team. Lack of clarity around goals. That's definitely showing up as a theme, the dynamics, the alignment. 360-degree understanding. Yeah, so views from other stakeholders. Working with teams who haven't been coached before. So that contracting may feel a little bit different or restrictive for them. Oh, lots of great responses. I'm just taking a look for some other themes here. Team versus group, sponsor and team disagreement. Siri, you're seeing the interference comment, same as Michael. Yep, absolutely. Lack of ownership and commitment. Okay. Well, we only have an hour and a half, but we'll see what we can do to address some of these. Okay, let's take a look here. And I put into some of the more common ones as well that we're looking at in terms of effectively, dealing with those challenges. So obviously, we need to have a relationship with the sponsor, the team leader, and every team member, and possibly even external stakeholders if we're bringing them in. And that sponsor, I saw someone put into the comments, if the sponsor's not on board or the sponsor doesn't want to go as deep. So sponsors in my world typically show up as HR or a more senior leader, and they can see that there's problems with the team that they're supporting in the organization. And so it's really important to spend that time up front understanding what the perceived needs are, and also educating them around what team coaching is and isn't. A lot of people think team coaching is more like team facilitation, and team coaching is more about emerging processes and dialogues. So there's no guarantees around what's going to be addressed up front. It means exploring what the team needs to develop. And of course, we need relationships with the team leader. The team leader is going to feel very vulnerable. And we're going to get into that in a little more detail. How do we support them as they support their team? Lack of a team coaching procurement process and experience. Anyone running into that with procurement departments who have no idea what team coaching is, and then you're trying to explain how you're going to invoice them and also educate clients on how to put out RFPs for team coaching. We also have challenges around the process. So are we going to do interviews? Are we going to do team diagnostics? Are we going to do both? And I don't know about you, but what I've been hearing from a lot of the coaches that I provide team coaching supervision to is there's no clarity or agreement on the number of team coaching sessions and the average duration of each. Here's a tip. I always set up team coaching as a process, just like you would one-on-one coaching. And I typically recommend it as a 6-month process from beginning to end so that we can have sustainable changes in behavior. I often, because of leadership teams I work with, I often do a team coaching assessment followed by monthly coaching sessions to address their action plan. So that's built into the conversation even before we start team coaching to ensure that we have that agreement. And each team coaching intervention needs to be uniquely designed based on the identified needs of the team. That's what I love about team coaching. It's so unpredictable, isn't it? But it's messy, and that can be hard, especially for some of you have really come in from, say, a facilitation mode where you're used to having like a leader's guide and you're timing out of activities. That's a big transition and a mind shift. So it's really being able to be open to what the team identifies as their need and how they're going to move forward. Difficult to get buy-in due to multiple sessions, due to time requirement and higher level of investment. So how many of you are finding that? Raise your hand right now, trying to get buy-in for more time or more money to guarantee. Yeah, absolutely. Seeing a number of hands. That's great. That's why I really propose that it happens over time, and that what we want to do is at least have a minimum 6 months, and that eventually at that point they can decide where they're at in terms of their progress. And often what I find is by then they're really involved in the process. They're seeing the behavioral changes. They're seeing the outcomes in terms of their business objectives. They often want to do another 3 months. And I've already included an additional 3-month team coaching package up front, so they know what that looks like. And here's another key. You're coaching the team as a system within their own systems. Every client I've ever worked with has always brought the concern of, we don't have enough time, or I'm not sure I can get the commitment from my team. Well, then share with them, we're going to do it in the context of their current work. Let me give you a quick example. So let's say we have a team and they've identified that they need to improve their team decision-making process. Then let's find out during a team coaching session, what's a real decision that you need to make as a team? In other words, it's going to be required for them to do it on the job. So let's not make team coaching an add-on. Let's do it in the context of their work. Go there and supervise and give them feedback on how they're doing as a team. And then, you can even train them perhaps in a team coaching model, et cetera. So things like that. Ethical considerations are getting more complex because of the multiple stakeholders. And obviously, you may even have multiple team coaches in one intervention. How many of you at least co-coach with others? Typically, especially if you have groups larger than 8. You're co-coaching. Some folks are, some folks aren't. So when you get into larger sessions where you might be doing team of teams engagements, you could actually have multiple coaches involved too. And I often find this other challenge here about whether one-to-one coaching will be included and when, and we'll address that in a few minutes. So let's start off with the sponsor. What information that we should contract around? And so let's take a look at what we should be discussing and educating and sharing them with and making sure we have agreement on. I find we should definitely be sharing what the role of the team coach is, sharing our team coaching philosophies and our frameworks. It's really helpful if you can share with them what the process is up front and what the expected outcomes are. In other words, make it easy for the sponsor to say, yes, I think this would be an appropriate solution to address the needs of this team. And of course, I can't reveal the conversations I have with the team. It's just like one-on-one coaching. You wouldn't go to the sponsor and tell them what you were talking about and reveal, because then you wouldn't have the trust with the coachee. Well, the coachee in this case is the team. So all I share with the sponsor is typically when the coaching engagements start and when they're occurring. And maybe at a high level, if the team has given me permission, what they're addressing. And I always obviously wrap up at the end by sharing the end of the team coaching engagement. And I encourage the team to meet with their team leader and to discuss the sustainability and results with the sponsor as well. Because the sponsor is more concerned too, like, are there going to be objectives achieved in terms of behavior and business outcomes? And is this worth the investment that we're making? So these are the key things to contract with the sponsor. And sometimes that requires a little bit of education, because if a sponsor might be someone in HR, for example, and they've been supporting the team to date, it might be hard for them to let go and to continue to, enable you to move in with the team. Contracting with the team leader themselves. How many of you find this challenging? Few people? Okay. And one of the things I often say, and I hear from the team leader, I'm just going to sit back. I'm just going to watch my team while you work with them. And so one of the things I definitely need to coach with them is to share what their role is and that they are a full member of the team and should be participating. I also need to share with them what the role of the team coach is. They too need to understand what team coaching philosophies and frameworks we're using. And I also need to work with them, to partner with them, to get them to positively introduce team coaching to the team. That this is a developmental opportunity for the team to become even higher performing. That this isn't being done to them because they're not performing. That this is an opportunity for them to improve. The leader of the team too is also going to be curious, as to whether or not they'll get some team coaching or one-on-one coaching in the context of the team coaching. So I contract with my leaders that I won't provide developmental coaching to them or to anyone on their team until I've built the trust with the entire team. Then we'll look at one-on-one developmental coaching. Often, though, how many of you have been doing one-on-one executive coaching, for example, and working with the team comes up as a goal, and hence you end up doing team coaching, right? So I think it's helpful to be transparent. Thank you, Mira. I saw your hand up there. It's helpful to be transparent with the team, to let them know that this is how you've been introduced, have the leaders share their experience of coaching and what it's going to be about. The other thing you might want to think about too is, am I going to have some time during the team coaching process to support that leader? So I typically do a 30-minute session before the ongoing coaching sessions once a month, whereby we connect. They can talk to me about what they've been able to do to support the team coaching in between meetings and coaching sessions. I can update them on what we can possibly address and check in with the team as the next topic or theme for them to address. They can update me on culture changes, etc. Because here's what's happening. The leader of the team is feeling a little vulnerable right now. And because they're accountable overall for the team. And I also find doing a debrief for 30 minutes after each team coaching session is very helpful, just to make sure that the leader understands what's happening and feels supported in what they need to do to help the team move further. And, I think the other big conversation is, how are we actually going to do this team coaching process? How many of you use team diagnostic assessments of some sort? Can you raise your hands? Okay, so quite a few. How many of you go in and do interviews? Okay, so quite a few of you as well. How many of you regularly do both? Okay, I've got to come to your sessions on EMCC to find out how you get the time for those. Often the teams, I see Michael Cullen laughing there. Yeah, exactly. Often I find the teams I'm working with are really compressed for time. And so if that's the case, I often contract with them to use a team diagnostic. And the reason being is that it's very compressed in time, 2 weeks. You can get all of the team members to complete the diagnostic, get the data prepared, and then prepare for your team reveal session. The other benefit of a diagnostic is that it's not biased. So unfortunately, we all have our own biases. And when we do interviews, and if we do interviews only, it might be our assessment of the team. And the team may not be as willing to accept that from me as when you give an assessment, all of the data comes from their team. So I'm seeing a couple of questions here in the chat. So let me just try to address those.
You see the one from Manira, just saying more recently, what diagnostics do individuals use? And I can put a link to the one that I use in the chat, but I thought it'd be useful for other people to put them in the chat as well, but also give the question to you as well, Michelle.
Oh, wonderful. I think that would be great. So I'm actually a senior team coaching faculty member of Team Coaching International and have been with them for 14 years. So I absolutely use the team diagnostic, their Team 360, TLV, etc. I am also trained in Peter Hawkins' Team Connect 360, as well as the 6 team conditions from Ruth Wegeman. So all of them are very valid and reliable assessment tools, and there's pros and cons around each of them. And, they all give you different insights into the team, into the conditions that they have, not only for team dynamics, but even clarity around their team purpose and things like that. So it can be really helpful. Yeah, seeing some folks put in here, which is wonderful, and the links too, fantastic.
There was a question earlier on as well, Michelle. Let me go back again. We may have covered this actually, but Patricia was asking, do we not include tripartite meetings for validating the various objectives, sponsor, organisation, coachee?
A great question. Thank you, Patricia. So I think a lot depends on the approach and the type of organization you're working with. I like to bring in external stakeholder feedback. And some stakeholder, so Peter Hawkins 360 Connect actually does bring in opportunities for external stakeholder. I'll often do that even by asking the team that I'm coaching, what are your relationships like with the other teams? How are you leveraging them? If you're working with a not-for-profit, you might want to interview the board, for example, get some insight from them. Again, a tool is just that. An assessment tool is just part of the insight into the whole process. And so depending on the complexity of the team that you might be working with, there can be value in getting that additional feedback. One of the things I like about getting stakeholder feedback is you're also helping the team see what do they need to do in the future, whether it be clients, for example, that they need to do now to change to get there. So it's that future forward, backward in process. Okay, let's continue on. Great questions. I really love them, by the way. Helps provide clarity. So we're going to have an opportunity now to actually go into some breakout rooms for at least 12 minutes. And many of us face these factors in terms of the coach and client dynamics. So what's the level of trust? Is there some vulnerability, threat of expert? What are the power issues that lie between the coach and the client? Is the team leader or the client resistant to change? What about fear? Are they worried or concerned about their role or what might happen as a result of the process? Are they even engaged or disengaged? So there's a whole number of issues here. And what I'm going to ask is, I'm curious, Nicola, are we able to share the screen into the breakout rooms? Because you're creating the breakout rooms and I have the PowerPoint.
Yes and no. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly put a screen grab of that onto a Google Doc. And then I'm going to share the link to the Google Doc in the chat, and then you should be able to see it. So
okay, fantastic. I appreciate that.
And it will be with you. Hang on a second.
And Nicola's going to put you into groups of 4 to 5 so that you get a real chance to digest this and discuss it with fellow colleagues. And when you come back, we'd love to hear in the chat, one key learning or new insight that you've learned as a result of it. And then we'll address them at a high level too to see what some of those common themes are. So welcome back, folks. So really curious to hear what you talked about in your breakout rooms. And maybe if you can just share a key learning or an idea, or if you want to actually share or identify one specific coach-client dynamic that you faced in contracting and how do you manage them? So we'll give you a couple of minutes to put your responses in, and then we'll go through the themes. Okay, so let's take a look. Some of those coach-client dynamics. Yeah, honesty or lack of transparency or honesty in the team, or maybe even the team leader. And so these are those elephants in the room that it's going to take time to get and encourage your team members to actually share, because you're going to have to help the team build some psychological safety in order to do that. Commitment to showing up. So one of the tips that I would suggest, if it's not a lack of motivation, is schedule all of your team coaching sessions when you finalize the initial contract. So for example, I typically do like a full day session up front with the team and then monthly 2-hour coaching sessions. Get all of them into the calendar over the course of the next 6 to 9 months. That way it serves 2 purposes. You're ensuring that you're going to have full participation ideally, and you're also going to have a regular cadence of coaching with the team. Yeah. How to coach a team that is struggling to honestly share their conflicts. So that's actually one of the top 5 issues that shows up in the teams I work with. And so you're probably going to have a coaching session to get them to identify, where does conflict emerge? What does it look like? What are the behaviors? There's a process or a tool that I learned in ORSC training called the conflict team protocol, which is basically a set of team norms around specific issues on conflict that you may get them to work on. And so that might be helpful too. And yeah. Dynamic nature of teams. Yeah, which makes that end game a moving target. And this is where it's also really helpful when you start the contracting process to identify what are the business objectives that the team coaching is going to be done within. Are they going through a significant transformation? Is it the installation of a new e-procurement system? Is it a service delivery transformation that they're going through? Isn't an alignment globally amongst divisions that needs to happen? So all of these things are really helpful to take a look at. Also, inconsistency. So that is, where you're going to have to help the team hold each other accountable to showing up. And those team norms will become really critical. So I'm just taking a look at some of the other messages. The importance and value of team diagnostics, absolutely. The balance between the team versus individual needs in a team coaching process. So, Munir, if you're able to come on and just share that, I'd love to hear what you were thinking of specifically or what came out in your group conversation. Munir, are you able to join us?
Michelle, I haven't done a heck of a lot of team coaching, but what came up for us is, as part of the team coaching, if you are sharing something like the 5 dysfunctionals of a team, and having them react and respond to that, that is something that you can do for the whole team. But then there are individual needs that come up through the assessment, for instance. So the question is around how do you balance, perhaps a teaching component, or maybe you don't do a teaching component with individual needs?
Great question. And one of the challenges to be an effective coach is always helping the team manage the polarities. And also you as the outside, coach, the objective observer, noticing those polarities. So one thing is to put it back to the team. Where do you want to focus on? Do you want to focus on the development of a team skill, perhaps? Or is there a need to have one-on-one coaching? And then if you have the trust of the team, absolutely, you can bring together a group of team coaches or one-on-one coaches and offer to do that. And in those conversations, it might be identified from their perspective, their skills or behaviors that they need to improve in order to be an effective team member, right? So there's multiple complexities. And I think, it's that question of when you're doing the team coaching, your contract is to focus on the team as a system, as a client, as a whole. So I don't typically do a lot of individual one-on-one coaching there. But for example, your question was, do I do any training? So I usually spend about, in an ongoing coaching session, I usually do a check-in. I have an accountability to see, were they able to implement or do what they said they were going to do? We confirm team norms. Probably 80% of the time is spent on team coaching. But for example, I might actually introduce a tool. So maybe it's how to give effective feedback and train them in that skill during that session. So hopefully that makes that a little more clear. So I think, my goal is to ensure that they have the tools and processes to have the skills to be an effective team. And you might even do something like I call a learning accelerator. So it's a contract where you give them 30 minutes or 60 minutes of homework. Maybe they have to practice using a new tool, or maybe they have to go and apply something that they've learned. Yeah, let's just keep going here. How do we ensure people commit to the team learning once the coach isn't in the room? Such a great question. So much easier when we're there. Well, I think this is that accountability piece that you build into each of the ongoing coaching sessions. So for example, I'll often have teams develop something called a positivity commitment, and they develop their team norms, typically early on in the process. And then you come back 1 month later and you check in with them and you're like, okay, so how are you doing with the team norms? And everyone's looking at one another, team norms, forgot all about them, which isn't unusual. So then that's where you have to have that conversation with them. Okay, well, what's the impact from you guys not doing this? How are you going to help hold each other accountable? So again, it's asking those questions to make sure that they're starting to develop the accountability themselves and getting them to generate ideas that will work for them. So having them visible, putting them at the top of their meeting agreements, actually evaluating them, having one individual actually, demonstrate or focus on one particular norm, for example. Yeah, I think, there's a lot of questions here, definitely around elephants in the room, ranging from cultural differences to difficulty in addressing clear goals or things like that. That takes time in building of trust. One thing that I do, I don't know if you can see it here, I have a toy elephant. It's a nice stuffy. And we're kind of getting out of contract. But anyways, I often introduce the elephant in the room, put it in the middle of the room, or virtually encourage them to find something that they can bring as a stuffy. And so when they need to share something difficult, it's actually really a whole lot easier when you can squeeze this thing like a stress ball and talk about it. So let me just continue on here to take a look at some of the other things here. So lots on psychological safety. Yeah, lots there. Okay, fantastic. Let's continue on and let's take a look at some of the other things that will be helpful for you. So what are some common questions that you might want to consider when you're contracting with the leader of the team? Well, these are just a sample of some of the things that I use to explore that relationship. And I think part of it is, how are we going to support one another? I want to make sure that I'm aligned with the leader of the team. I also want to feel confident that they are comfortable in introducing me and the team coaching process to the team itself as well. How are we going to create that psychological safety for the team? So having those frank conversations with the leader, do you think people actually feel comfortable in asking questions, taking risks? And how can we support that both in team coaching and outside of team coaching? How will we press that pause button if something occurs and we need to pause the team coaching session and address something in the moment? How do we help support each other both before and after the team coaching sessions? So again, all of these are really critical because they help give you an understanding, they help develop trust, and they help develop expectations. And I think when we don't have those clear expectations, that's when we start to get into trouble. Okay, contracting with the team itself. Again, another layer of complexity. So here's where it's helpful to share, what your role is as a systemic team coach. They've probably never been through team coaching before. They might be a little anxious. They might not know what the purpose is. So again, all of this, you can set the stage even before you get together for your first official team coaching. Clarifying the role of the leader. So making sure too that they know the leader will be a full participating team member, and make sure that they understand the context of the initiative. So this is where we're setting clear expectations. So for example, I might share with them that the organization is sponsoring a team coaching process to enable them to successfully deliver on their service delivery transformation for a particular division in an organization. And maybe they're the leadership team responsible for this. And the organization sees this as a developmental opportunity to enhance the team's ability to do this because it's such an important transformational objective and it's being done in a shorter time frame. Often it can be helpful too to think about setting expectations with the team members themselves and what's expected of them. So have this conversation even with the leader of the team beforehand. How are you going to position participation and attendance? So I usually suggest that we try to strive for 100% participation. It may not be possible during the ongoing coaching sessions because people have vacations, etc. However, when we first kick it off, we definitely want to have everyone there so that we have common ground to build from. And when we schedule that far in advance, then if there, for some reason, something happens in the organization and we need to reschedule, that's fine. People are clear around the expectations. And even things like them being fully participative in sessions. So what are you guys doing right now in terms of when you do virtual team coaching? Are there cameras on, cameras off? What's the agreement? Some other things to think about too, what to do when the team gets off track or is not aligned with their own purpose. This never happens. Anyone here found teams get talking about things and all of a sudden it's like, oh, maybe we should check in. At the beginning of your session, you define this as your objective or goal, and now you're talking about this. And that might be okay, but we need to check in with them. And how do we pause or stop that process? And then, of course, we need team agreements or norms or operating guidelines, whatever you want to call them. But essentially, these are the agreements that we want to have to help define the behaviors of the team. And I know I was talking with someone earlier. I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but you said one of the challenges you have is, what if the team doesn't identify confidentiality, for example? up front, and that's really important. Well, then that's where you can put forward. One of the agreements that most of my teams often do is a confidentiality agreement. Can we see a show of hands that everyone agrees to keep names and confidential information like that here in the room, but they can take the learning outside the room? Because that can be really important. Let's do a little bit more detail now around those creating the team agreements. So Nicola, just to let you know, we're going to go into breakout groups shortly. So I just want to give you a heads up on that. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to put you into some small groups again and give you about 14 to 15 minutes. And I'd like you to think about, as a team coach, what are some potential themes that would be identified? So for example, I often hear this team agreement that we want to ask questions or actively listen and ask questions to understand. There might be agreements around managing conflict or supporting one another or giving positive and constructive feedback. And then I want you to discuss in your group, how do you help create those agreements that focus on behavior? Because as many of you have probably experienced, there can be a lot of interpretations based on wording. So for example, if people share, well, let's respect one another. Great, but what does that look like? People might walk away with different interpretations. And last but not least, are there any specific agreements that should be developed between the team and the coach themselves? Welcome back. So I'm going to encourage a little bit of an open dialogue here for a few minutes. So one person did post into the chat, what did I mean by themes? So in other words, I meant, what were the common agreements that you might help a team actually come up to? So agreements around decision-making, dealing with conflict, participation, attendance, feedback, supporting one another. So that's, one of the things I was thinking about. I'm curious, how many of you have actually developed specific agreements between yourself as the coach and the team? And sometimes we have to make these really explicit, either beforehand or based on our experience of watching the team. Anyone willing to share? Anyone ever had a situation with the team where they felt they needed to add to the contract specifically between them and the team?
Don't do anything in writing. This is Andy. I'm from Sweden.
Hi, Andy.
But we often have the discussion with the team initially about what the responsibilities are, and we're very clear that this is your process, and the results in the room, they're all yours. We're not going to take anything away. And being very clear on us being a confidential party to whatever is discussed, setting up sort of a safe container around the whole session.
Wonderful. Absolutely.
That's basically what we do.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, what you said, creating that safe container is so critical, because the team may be a little cautious as to why they're getting coached. And they may be a little bit worried about, well, what might the sponsor do, or how might this impact us in our roles? So I contract really around confidentiality specifically with the team. And I share with them that whatever is shared in the room stays in the room, that whatever they share with me is between us, and that it's not going outside to other potential stakeholders. And I think that's really clear. And that's important to help establish that psychological safety and trust that is required as well. And so if the team hasn't actually suggested that, I will suggest a confidentiality agreement. So I'm seeing some questions coming up in the chat here. So how do you include or not include the HR business partner? So Maureen, feel free to come on if you want to clarify. I'm assuming that the HR business partner in this case might be more of a sponsor. Perhaps they were the ones who reached out to you and contacted you. Could you help clarify that?
Yeah, no, actually not. I was contracted by the team leader. I had him in executive coaching. Then he said, oh my goodness, you've got to bring this to my team. So I had him do, so I had some assessments of the Clifton strengths plus the psychological safety. And at the day before, the team session, the HR says, I can't believe it. 2 days before. Number one, I need an agenda. What are you going to do at what time? And number two, I have to be on the psychological safety. And I said, well, you're not on the team. It's going to, anyway, there was nothing. I just threw him in there, but it skewed the results because he's not on the team. But anyway, I had to put him in. I gave him.
Yeah, so difficult situation. Go ahead, Mark. Would you like to address that?
Yeah, that was kind of similar to what was on my mind, in that our people often are, they're used to a training environment. And so they look to me as come in very much like a trainer, or at best a facilitator, but with a structured agenda and timeline. And I'm rather Rogerian in my approach, and where I show up and say, okay, we're all here together. What's our agenda? And so I kind of have to blend that a little bit in terms of, what do you want to be different as a result of us working together? Or the question that one of my breakout partners offered, and I've forgotten about this phraseology, and I love it, is, what are your best hopes for this process of working together? Those kind of things, to get them to, and without letting them know they're setting the agenda, they're setting our agenda to some degree, and make sure that we record all those as we go, so that they have the same meaning as that they thought they were expressing, and let them know this is our agenda going forward. If we can address all these things, do you think it'll be worthwhile? And most people will then say they agree, because it was their agenda.
Absolutely. And that's the difference between team coaching and team facilitation, right? Is the team determines and the team owns what it's going to address. I'm not there to solve their problems. I'm there to provide a safe space, a container, as Andy said, for them to have safe dialogue to address those issues. And so, Maureen, I understand the complexity of your situation. I've been there myself. I think it's really important to share, what's the value of team coaching, and that it should only be for the team itself, because they're the system, and to contract that perhaps because HR is an external stakeholder, that maybe there are opportunities that the team invites HR in, or that the leader of the team shares the learning with HR as they go throughout the process. That I've done, because then that way the leader has that opportunity to get support if they can from HR, but at the same point, the team feels safe and that there's confidentiality in their conversations. So
yeah, well,
looks like
we're just one last thing. We were in a castle for an offsite for 3 days. So he was going to be there anyway. He's also the guy that pays me. But number two, the agenda, I just wrote 9 to 12, some of the questions that were brought up in the intake, and, whatever. But I put him into the psychological safety because he just really insisted on it. He said, I'm present at the team meetings. Anyway. Whatever, that's just my dilemma.
So that's an interesting comment as to who is actually part of those team meetings on a regular basis. And so one of the biggest challenges is contracting who an assessment is going to go out to and who is actually part of the team. And are they part of the team where they are contributing to the overall team purpose and goals, and are they part of that meeting? And that's the biggest challenge. What's the size of the team going to be as well? Because oftentimes people will call a group a team just because they report into them. And so it's determining whether or not there's sub-nested teams as well, for sure. So I'm going to continue on here. There's lots of great questions, and we'll come back, and please feel free to propose them if we have us a little more time. But I just want to share some tips as well around effective team agreements. Make sure we're using clear language, that they're specific and behavioral. And by that, here's my test. So when people put their ideas in for team agreements, I ask them the question, what would you see people do? Or what would you hear them say? Because we need to put it in behavioral terms, so that way everyone can relate to it. Because if I just say, oh, great, we want to have open, honest communication. Well, what exactly does that look like, right? And that can be construed so many different ways. So if we can turn that around and get them to reframe it into the behaviors, I find it really helps the team hold each other more accountable for it. And I actually teach them how to practice calling in people when we're not supporting those behaviors before we even let them go from that team coaching session. And by that, I mean, nobody wants to call somebody out by name. Like nobody wants to say, oh, John, you're not listening to everybody, because that's not helpful. But what you might be able to do is say, oh, can we just pause the process for a moment? I'm not sure we're abiding by our team norms and that everyone's getting an opportunity to speak. And that's about calling attention to the process, which is what one of the important things is about the team norms. And the team norms, just in case you don't know, number one way to increase trust. So you're going to have to think about too, and the team's going to have to decide too, what are they going to do when people aren't honoring the norms? And how do you coach the team when these agreements are violated? So one of the things you can do is check back in every time you have, One of the things you can do is check back in with the team and have them evaluate how well they're doing on the team norms. You can do it virtually with Annotate, or you could do it in person with check marks, and then have them decide when they're going to let go of a team norm because they're doing the behavior or when they're going to continue with it. Okay, common scenario. Here's a challenge I often get. So let me put it out to you, and I encourage you to share some ideas. What would you do as a team coach if one member of the team contacted you outside of a team coaching session and they wanted to talk about a particular issue on the team, or they wanted to talk about one of the team members? And typically it's not about something positive. Usually it's about blaming or toxic communication. What would you do? Anyone willing to take a stab?
Send her back to the team.
Thank you, Andy. You should be co-facilitating here with me. Part of this is all about making sure that we're supporting the team in its agreements. So you may need to set a specific part of the contract to say, if you reach out to me, I can coach you on how to bring an issue back to the team, but I am going to turn you back to the team so that the team can address the issue together. And that's the big difference.
I think you have to help that person sometimes figure a way for them to present that back to the team. I think that my role is not to, it may be to coach them on how to discuss that with the team, and it may be my role has been sometimes in that situation to build safety for them to do that by maybe getting them with the team leader first and doing some interventions like that. But I think the key thing is safety and being able to have them be the sponsor of whatever their issue is back to the team. But sometimes that takes a couple of interventions.
Wholeheartedly agree, Jack. Sometimes we have to coach and provide the skill development so that they have the confidence and that ability to bring the issue back to the team. And that can be really helpful. Absolutely. So the key is not to engage in a separate conversation and to encourage dialogue outside of the team. And so I'm going to share with you a really quick story. I was working with a senior leadership team whom a senior HR director had been supporting. She had a relationship with them. She was not part of the team coaching. She was the sponsor. And what some people started to do is they started to talk to her in between the team coaching sessions. And I had to coach her that what she was doing by helping them was actually undermining the team coaching process. So then we had to develop a specific contract around how to support each other in supporting the team. So you know what? There's lots of different situations that come up. And that's, again, one of the things that I love about this. Okay, let's think about another layer in the whole team coaching process. What about contracting with your co-coach? So some of you indicated that you do use co-coaches, and I believe ICF recommends as soon as you get to 12 people, you should ethically be coaching with someone else. So let's share your responses in chat. What types of things would you want to address and contract for with a co-coach?
Michael did answer my question. What are other words to use other than the word safety for people who don't relate to that word? And Michael suggested trust. So yeah, I was looking for a different word than safety. I think number one, it's overused. And number two, there are people that don't feel unsafe. They relate that to more of a emotional vulnerability that they don't experience. So
It could even be related to trauma. So that's the value of a team coach, is getting to know the culture of the client that you're working with, checking in with the leader. You know, does this language make sense if I use this? And someone asked earlier, should I teach psychological safety? Well, again, that would be something you may have to contract to do outside of team coaching to provide a base. But the language you use is absolutely critical. And that's the benefit of working with the leader.
Yeah, Nicole said respect. Thank you for those. Thank you for suggestions.
Love this, how we're all helping each other out. Wonderful. Okay, let's take a look at some of the common themes appearing around building a contract with your co-coach. Awesome. Let's take a look here. Roles and responsibilities, managing strengths and biases. Yeah, absolutely. What do they need from me? What do I need from them? You know, how do we contract with each other? How do we be honest with each other? Absolutely. And I'm going to share with you some other things that you might want to keep in mind too when you're thinking about contracting with your co-coach. Because oftentimes we have a good relationship with someone, they go, oh, no problem, we'll be able to work with them. And then all of a sudden the coaching starts to get complex. And as someone said, we definitely need to contract regarding our roles. I was trained as an organization development practitioner first. So I'm used to doing what's called process versus content. You could assign that to coaches to monitor. You might want to think about, okay, if we're working face-to-face with our clients, can I touch you on the shoulder or the knee? And that means that I want to speak or I want to build on what you said. How do we do that virtually? I often use WhatsApp so that we can connect while we're co-coaching. Thinking about, you know, how do we make each other aware of dynamics as they're occurring? And are we building time in for ourselves to prepare prior to those team coaching sessions and to debrief them? The debriefs are amazing. I am always honored and privileged to hear so many great content pieces and process ideas by working with a co-coach, things that I don't get on my own. Tip again, by the way, if you are coaching a team on your own, book yourself at least 30 minutes after a session to debrief yourself and just write down all the things that worked well, what didn't work well, what you would have done differently. Make sense? Thumbs up, folks? Okay, let's continue on then. And again, someone asked earlier about the tripartite, and I apologize if I assumed that was referring to other stakeholders. But what I was interpreting from that is that you may have to contract with other teams that interact with a team. You might have to contract or have a conversation with a board if it's a not-for-profit and you're working with a leadership team. And so we may want to contract for things like participation in interviews or feedback through assessments, even bringing them into a coaching session, for example. We might coach 2 teams at once, and even contracting for provision of feedback. So again, think about the other stakeholders who are going to be impacted and what the value is in coaching them and what you may need to contract for. Around contracting skills, I think it's really important that we get comfortable as team coaches sharing what we need. Often the client is very good at sharing what they need, but we also have to share what we need. So for example, be really clear around the types of physical spaces that you need, whether you need to be off-site, whether people will be checking phones or not checking phones, all of that type of thing. Also, if you don't feel a project or a team coaching initiative is going to be really successful, then say no. And I get when you're starting out, sometimes that can be hard because you're looking for the experience. But if you don't see a leader that's committed or a team's not showing up and you've coached and had that conversation and they still aren't, then maybe it's time to stop it and say, look, if you're not committed to it, then it's not going to work, because this is also your brand and your reputation on the line. Plus, it violates, the objectives that you developed at the beginning of the contract, and you may have to recontract around what you need to do with the team. Again, here's just some tips, for successful contracting, making sure you're clear on each of the roles involved in the contracting process, being yourself, knowing what your values are, what you will and won't do. making sure too that you take notes when you're contracting with your clients. And one thing that I find really helpful, even if you don't have a written contract per se, I often take just bullet points and notes and send that back to the particular stakeholder and ask them just to confirm the understanding. And that makes sure that we're aligned up front. And it's less likely that we're going to run into a situation where we don't have that clarity. And whether you're internal or external, I highly recommend it just as a process to engage and to ensure clarity. Wonderful. And let me just take a look here. What I'm going to suggest at this point is we are really at the end of the session. And so I'm open to questions that you might want to share, questions that other people can benefit from. And then, of course, we also have our half-hour contracting as well. So let me take this down and let's just open it up for questions. And feel free to use either the chat or to verbally share. I love it when people engage with me. So, oh, you're very welcome for all of those who've been such positive feedback around the session. It really comes from you guys. I'm honored to be here and love the participation. Any additions around some of the other things? Please, Denise.
Yeah, so you talked about at the beginning when you're setting up the contract or you're setting up all the situation, and you talked a little bit about, I was kind of looking at my notes where you might go, they don't have enough time for as much time, the hour-long conversation you want to have with them. So if you could talk a little bit more about, well, how do you go in? Do you go into the workplace and hang out with them? Do you attend their meetings? Like, what are some things that you've done so you get a perspective of what's happening?
Yeah, those are definitely interventions that you might build into your contract, that you might observe them in a meeting process and then be able to give them feedback. But what I'm hearing about, first of all, is how do we contract for the time so that we have regular ongoing coaching sessions? And I think that's really important up front, that when you establish after you've revealed the data, whatever way you've collected it to them, and the team has developed its action plan, I share with them, I would suggest a monthly 2-hour team coaching session, for example. And I usually get, because I'm working with leadership teams, usually there's an admin person who will absolutely book those in for 6 months in a row. That's the way to secure that. And then I actually have them book in the time with the leader of the team before and after. All of that's done in the calendars, because honestly, one of the biggest challenges we have is just trying to get into people's time slots, especially if you're working with leaders. They're booked for 2 and 3 meetings. Their calendars are often booked 6 months in advance. My calendar is often booked up to 9 months in advance. And that is the only way that we can guarantee that we're going to pay attention to a regular cadence and make the commitment, because the time is there. Because if you try to do it as you go along, it's much more difficult.
And so intervention, thank you for that. So intervention would be where you put that in the contract. I'll come to some of your meetings to observe, right?
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
Yep. So I had a team, this was an organization, again, another senior leadership team. They were doing their strategic planning session. And I had the leader, actually, he was more interested in getting my feedback on how they were interacting as a team. So we put that into the contract, that I would observe them in a couple of strategic planning sessions. And it was actually helpful for me too, because I got to see how they were engaging with one another. And it was a way for me to collect some additional data about the team.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you. I see Andy's hand up. You're welcome.
Yeah, I was thinking, sometimes when you work with a team and you started out contracting and you notice this isn't working, you need to recontract. Do you have any comments on recontracting or nice ways to bring it up, or do you just sort of reflect back to them, or what do you do?
Andy, you're asking a Canadian if there's any nice ways to bring it up. Come on, we're known for our politeness. This is where it's helpful. I had a mother who was Scottish and more direct. So now most of my experience has also been in the private sector. So, and I'm going to be honest, my style is probably a little more direct. And I'm also more comfortable in my skills as a team coach, and also knowing, if things aren't going well. So if in my gut, I have this feeling that something's not right. So, it's trying to figure out, why isn't this team progressing or whatnot? Then I'm going to put the questions out there, and I'm going to get the team to address them. Because if it's not going right, so for example, I was working with one team, and the organization had been going through a major restructure. And unfortunately, the leader of the team hadn't shared that with me. So of course, everyone's minds was on this. So they weren't active in the session, right? Of course. So I'm like, do we need to reschedule this session? So it could be something as simple as that. Or if there's a lack of psychological safety or trust with the leader of the team. So let's be honest. A lot of times the challenges within a team, a source of them could be the leader themselves. And, you can see that that's throwing off the team coaching process. And so I might need to have an aside conversation and give some feedback directly to the leader on what I'm observing, and help them understand the impact of their behaviors. And then ideally, we're working towards getting the team members to share the impact and using those norms a whole lot more than what they may have been. And then sometimes I'm seeing, especially with a lot of virtual teams, they haven't met each other or worked together, or a lot of people have been onboarded during COVID. So building trust, someone mentioned Stephen Covey's exercises. He actually has a great handout in 13 behaviors of trust in leaders. It's building the relationships up front and making sure the time is done for that. So helping them get to know each other as people outside of work. Sometimes it's as simple as that, because if we don't have the relationships and the trust and respect, then it's going to be really tough to bring those issues up within the team. Hopefully that gives you some thought.
Great, thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you. Pilar.
Hi there. Thanks for this session, Michelle. You've been very generous with your knowledge. Thanks a lot. Now, I just wanted to ask you something, because it struck me, because I was being very, for me, it was a no to have a contracting with the team leader. And you said it is needed a separate contracting with the team leader. I understand before the first session, and I see, for me it's a gray area when those aside conversations are allowed. So first at the beginning, obviously, to clarify expectations about his role, and then obviously making it transparent within the team, right? Within the first session, I guess.
Yeah. Well, to me, that's about making sure you and the leader are aligned. It's about ensuring that you're setting the team coaching process up for success. And the leader is actually taking on this whole point of where his team, so to speak, is kind of being examined. Like they might be feeling that way. There might be a fear that team coaching has been brought in for them because their team isn't performing. And leaders are responsible for their team's results. And so I think it's really important to address any of those potential fears, have those conversations, let them know that you're there to support them, that you'll coach them regarding their role in the process as it's ongoing. And it may even potentially involve some additional coaching. Maybe there's some developmental goals that you're going to help them identify based on observations you see of them. Or maybe you might even need to contract with them to share with you some insight around some coaching maybe that they're getting from a different coach based on one-on-one. Those to me aren't side conversations. I'm transparent that, with the team that we've talked about all of these things. Side conversations to me is when team members are getting together and they're not supporting their team norms. So I had one team, for example, they onboarded this new person and they already had an agreement that they would not refer to anything in the past, that they were only going to be future focused. And as soon as that new person was brought in, they shared with them the whole team story, the grapevine and everything else. And interestingly enough, that person shared with me and I'm like, wow, I'm really sorry. And that is so disappointing to hear. And I had to go back and it was actually two co-leaders of the team. So even more disappointing. So I actually had a specific direct conversation with them because they were undermining the whole process. And we had to recontract around what their role was and what my role was and all of that. So yeah, I've got lots of good stories, both good and bad, but go ahead, Dion, please.
Hi, thank you for the really nice presentation in the chat and sharing your experiences and tips. Actually, I want to share an experience I had and hear your thoughts, or if anyone else would like to contribute. So I was training for my coaching qualification last year, and I haven't done a lot of team coaching myself, but early on I did 2 different teams. I coached 2 different teams. So one of them was the management of the organization, that is a very small team group. It was the management of the organization that brought them for coaching. And as part of my contracting, I knew that the team was on board and they knew about it and they had been communicating and they were happy to participate. When I did the coaching, it was facilitated in the form of some training as well to open the conversation around a specific topic around marketing and engagement. But actually, I started observing a lot of different things. First of all, I could see there was not communication flowing between the team members. And the second thing that was more obvious to me was that because their management was present in that session, more junior members didn't feel comfortable to open up, share even their experiences or offer feedback, input in any form, or contribute to the conversation. So when I was putting back the questions to them, trying to engage, and something you mentioned, you put it directly back to them because it's not your session. It's not you deciding for them, making decisions. It was really silent for very long times and it was really awkward. So what I did, I asked permission if I can share some personal experiences, and they were very happy for me to do that. And only after that, I noticed 2 people straight away raised their hands and said, oh, actually, I can relate to that because I had similar experience, and it started opening the conversation. And I would like to hear your thoughts, because at the time I didn't have a lot of experience. How would you handle that?
Yeah, so I hope I'm understanding all of the context correctly. So what I'm hearing from you is that you had both the management team and the people they supported in the same room. And so kudos for doing that, first of all. I'm not sure if it's pure team coaching, but definitely a facilitated session to get them together. And I think that's really important, because one of the things that I like to support, whether I'm facilitating or coaching, is we need to actually get together with the people we're interacting with on a daily basis. Like, I don't do training separate for managers and training separate for employees. You're smart to bring them together. However, there's a power dynamic that is there. And because managers have responsibility and overhead for people's performance and career paths, people, as you said, weren't likely to speak up. So there's a couple of things you may have considered to do differently. One is to get people to put their ideas up on sticky notes. So pose the questions. And this is also good for introverts, because too often we ask people verbally for information, and the extroverts bring their ideas and everyone builds off of that, and the introverts get left behind. So ask a question, give time for everyone to reflect, then ask everyone to write their responses down, and then post them so that everyone can see them. And you're going to have a wider range of responses of which to have the conversation. That's one potential way to help support inclusion. If there was really a lot of distrust, for example, I might question whether it would have made sense to bring them together in the first place, and maybe to coach them separately and then bring them together, as opposed to being a sub-nested team. Hopefully that gives you some things to think
thank
about.
you so much. That's really helpful.
And good luck on your team coaching journey. We all start somewhere, and we all learn by our mistakes, and that's how we get there. And I want to share with you something that I always do. The word fail stands for first attempt in learning. FAIL stands for first attempt in learning. And honestly, I've made lots of mistakes myself. And the other thing I would share is always trust the group process. Even if you make a mistake, you can probably recover. If you don't ask the right question, you ask a different question and it lands differently. And continue to trust the group. I think teams often have those wisdom within, and we need to tap into that more. Other questions or comments? This is awesome. A process called Think, Write, Share. That's exactly what I'm referring to, Shushma. Absolutely. Yeah.
We've got one further up with a chat from Esther, actually. Apologies if we've covered it in another way, but it says we talked about interviewing team members individually to gather the information and then coach the team with the anonymized data. What's your view on that? Also, do you continue coaching the team only without individual conversations?
Okay, so doing the interview, I'm sorry, Nicola, could you just repeat the question again?
Yeah,
I apologize.
Let's have a bit of a scroll. Unless Esther, you want to come in? Is Esther still here?
Yeah, I am. The question is the balance between talking with individuals before the team coaching and the coaching itself. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so here's my honest opinion. And I'm one of those people who likes to get to know people before we begin an official team coaching process. But I often find the interview is more about me feeling comfortable as opposed to the actual team coaching process, which I don't know what's going to emerge. And so I think the greater balance should be on team coaching as opposed to spending as much time up front getting to identify individual needs. I believe in systemic team coaching too. So that's my own philosophical belief where the entire team is a system. So I like to get the team engaged in sharing information with one another. That's why my preference typically for using a team diagnostic, like some type of survey tool, because it's only the start of the conversation. Same as the data you gather with interviews. It's only going to be the start until you define actually, you have to have the team define what their goals are. You're going to be moving much more quickly ahead in that direction as opposed to being engaged with the data you might have collected, regardless of how you did that. Does that make sense, Esther?
Yeah, though, how do you do that in a dysfunctional team to start with? And how do you build the trust? Because if people don't want to talk with you or have to talk only in the team, they may not want to share.
Yeah, so I think we run into the danger of when we encourage people to talk to us one-on-one, then now they've got an outside escape of not bringing the information to the team. And unless we coach them on how to bring it back to the team and create opportunities for them to do so in the context of the team, they're never going to learn the skills of bringing up difficult conversations with their team. And so I think that's, one of the things I contract for right up front. So let me give another example that might clarify. I did a team assessment and there were some open-ended questions at the end of the team assessment. And I had shared with everyone that I would actually collate the questions and that they wouldn't be individually identified. Well, people completed the assessment, then all of a sudden within the next few days, I got all these emails from people saying, don't say my answers. So obviously this was telling me this was a team very, very low on trust. Now, the particular assessment I was using was the team diagnostic assessment through Team Coaching International. And one of their 14 factors is around trust. So that was confirmed for me when I got the assessment back, that it was really low on trust. And so I could already see that people wanted to reach out to me because they wanted to have that opportunity to voice their concerns and to talk about the past. And I often find the most helpful thing you can do is help a team accept its current state by the data you collected in interviews or an assessment, to help them understand what their strengths are as a team, and then what their opportunities for development are as a team. And then help them develop an action plan for moving forward. And then what you're going to do is in those ongoing coaching sessions, you're going to address those key themes. So that dysfunctional team might have had issues with conflict, for example, and that would have been identified potentially as a team performance indicator to work with in a future coaching session. But the key is to get them to move on to the future state. As soon as you start the team coaching, say, here's our present state, and then have them do some type of exercise, even like a best team exercise. Share stories of the best team they were on and talk about all the factors that created that, and have them aspire to what do they want to be as a team working together, and then focus the team coaching on closing the gap. Awesome.
Thank you so much. I've got a question for you, Michelle. We've had such a fantastic conversation here today. I'm really interested in what you yourself is going to take away from the conversation that we've had here, and what's been sparking in your mind as we've been having the conversation.
In my mind?
Yeah. What are you taking away from it yourself? What's your own reflection?
Yeah. That team coaching is hard. It really is hard work, and we all bring different skills to it. And contracting itself is a multi-layer process, and contracting happens throughout the process, and it's recontracting. And that this is not easy work that we do, and that we can learn from our mistakes, and that we can certainly, strengthen our skills in contracting in order to set ourselves and the teams up for better success. I think, those are some of the key messages I'm taking away. And I encourage all of you, to really work on the contracting, because if you're clear with them around the roles, you're clear on what their business objectives or outcomes are, you're clear around confidentiality agreements and all of that. Honestly, it prevents some of those issues from coming up and derailing team coaching. And because once you're in the team coaching, you want to focus on helping the team move forward. And, the contracting process really lends itself well to that success. So thank you, Nicola. I appreciate that question. We didn't even have a chance to go into networking the way we normally do. We had so many questions here, which is awesome.
No, well, thank you. I mean, I did check in with the group as well to say, are you happy to stay here? And I didn't.
Oh, good.
And everybody didn't say no. We want to stop. We want to go to networking. So I think everybody's really appreciated this run on, which has been so valuable. We're just getting everybody's questions and thoughts. And actually, I want to thank everybody here as well, because everybody's engaged so amazingly in the chat and with each other as well. I've been really, really positive about co-creating, which is exactly why we put these dialogues on as well. So thank you to everybody here as well for everything that you've been doing to engage so amazingly. And Michelle, thank you very much as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate everyone coming in. It was an amazing session. I appreciate the involvement, the conversations, the dialogues. Thank you for your contributions. Team coaching is a growing and evolving field, and so excited to see more people get involved in it. And if there's ever an opportunity wherever you are around the world, I'm happy to come and speak within your association. And you've got my contact information. There's a QR code at the end of the slide deck. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, happy to do so as well. We all need to support each other. There's a lot of collective impact that we can do out there. Thank you so much, everyone.